third METU Talks Architectural History series. It's very good to see you all again and within this very extraordinary circumstances. Thank you for joining us for this evening's lecture. Today, we have two very distinguished speakers, Selin Küçük and Tolga Uyar. Let me do a very short introduction for those of you who are not really familiar with their work. Selin Küçük is an architect, and she has a B.Arch and M.Arch degrees from ODTÜ, Istanbul Technical University Department of Architecture, and she is working on the field with Tolga Uyar, who is an associate professor of art history. Tolga Hocam, please correct me if I do a mistake on this, but he has degrees and then PhDs from the Sorbonne University from France, and he is the expert on the architecture, Byzantine architecture in Cappadocia. He has articles and published in multiple journals, especially I think the 13th century wall paintings of Cappadocia. And today we are very lucky, also from my personal interest, that they will be presenting an ongoing field research to us. This is as far as I know, the original material. They are now following an ongoing project on the field. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And the floor is yours.
Thank you for this wonderful introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us on this METU Talks Architectural History online event. Also, we'd like to thank the organizers of this meeting for inviting us. We are here today to present the preliminary results of our fieldwork carried out last summer during the months of August and September in the ancient city of Mokissos in Western Cappadocia. First, I'd like to set a framework on the geography, history, and the identification of the settlement and give an overview of the urban tissue. Then my colleague Selin will take the floor and talk about the habitation quarters. She will present an initial assessment of our architectural survey based on respective case studies. And finally, I will try to deal with the broader historical context of the secular architecture in Mokissos within Byzantine Anatolia and further. I'd like to remind you once again that today's lecture aims to present a work in progress without necessarily definitive conclusions. The archaeological remains known locally as Viranşehir or Viranşehir, ruined city, are located on the northwestern slopes of Hasanda, about 30 kilometers south of the regional capital of Aksaray. I don't know if you are able to see my cursor.
Yes.
So we're here, Helvadere, not very far from Aksaray. Hidden in the upland valley above the small town of Helvadere, the ruins mainly consist of houses crudely built of rough basalt blocks, as well as mausolea, churches, and cisterns neatly constructed of ashlar. Despite its designation as a ruined city, the settlement is currently the largest and most well-preserved Eastern Roman town in the historical region of Cappadocia. 19th century Western travelers and early 20th century archaeologists and philologists at first introduced the ruins of Viranşehir to the academic world through their travel accounts and research reports. Initially, the settlement was associated with the Hellenistic fortress of Nora, or Nereossos, well, a well-known castle in the historical sources of antiquity. While the toponym of Nora from the remote past is still nowadays linked to the site of Viranşehir. For example, there's a shopping mall in Aksaray called Nora. This speculative localization has not been accepted in the scientific world. The most plausible identification of the ruins as the Byzantine city of Mokissos has prevailed from the late 1930s to nowadays, and is based on the account of the 6th century Byzantine chronicler Procopius, who writes, I quote, "There was a certain fortress in Cappadocia, Mokissos by name, situated on level ground, but it had sunk into such a state of disrepair that part of it had fallen down and the rest was on the point of doing so. All this the Emperor Justinian pulled down, and he built a very strong wall to the west of da-da-da-da-da-da." So we have a detailed account of the kind of refoundation of the town by Procopius. Well, other primary sources also describe the religious significance of the town under Justinian. Mokissos became the seat of an archbishopric and ecclesiastical capital of the province of Cappadocia Tertia, which you don't see on this map because this map relates to the administrative division of Asia Minor under Justinian, but not ecclesiastical. But well, there was under division within the Cappadocia Secunda, so it became the ecclesiastical capital of the Cappadocia Secunda by taking the name Cappadocia Tertia. No archaeological evidence of public buildings, baths or hospices, or the strong city wall mentioned by Procopius are identifiable on the ground. However, other urbanistic and architectural characteristics of the present settlement support its identification with Mokissos and accord with 6th century date and historical context. Mokissos has been already subject of an extensive field survey, followed by a publication by Albrecht Berger in mid-90s. As the new survey team today, we are both literally fortunate having Berger's book-length essay published in Istanbuler Mitteilungen for the in 98, and of course some other shorter notes of him about 6th century settlement in Viranşehir. Even today, with all the technological advances we have at our disposal, it is difficult to add something new to Berger's excellent analysis of the settlement. I was hoping he would join us today, but he's not here. And of course, his conclusions without further archaeological investigation. This is why we are starting from the summer onwards and on the approved permit request of the Ministry of Culture Service of Antiquities, an excavation and a broader settlement archaeology project in the field. Besides traditional excavation methods, our aim is also to employ other digital modeling and interpreting settlement patterns through the wave-shield analysis, spatial statistics tools such as ArcGIS, where the positioning of the monuments hinterland are evaluated relative to the landscape, and other broader landscape features of the city's hinterland zone. I mean, the whole Hasanda area in connection with the town. Well, hopefully. So let me give you an overview of a topographical overview of the settlement. Well, as I just mentioned, the city is settled in an upland valley, which is defined a parasitic volcano crater of Hasanda. So it looks like a bowl, like a natural bowl. So the valley is aligned in north-south direction, as you see here. This is our topographical plan. I mean, our mapping, our digital mapping of the last summer. And this is from Google Map. South-north, about 1 kilometer long and 200-meter wide at the northern end, another rather shorter valley, about 300-meter long, branch off to west. So this is west-east. To the east and west, so here and here, steep hills of about 1,500 meters. So creates sort of natural depression in the center, whose bottom is at an elevation of nearly 1,400 meters. So there's almost, at certain points, 100 meters of difference between the bottom of the valley and the surrounding hills. So to the south, there is a dense forest here, and we suppose this was the case in 6th century as well. The ancient city was accessible through the antique road entering the city from west and exiting from east. But from 19th century onwards, this rather shortcut entrance has been used, as we know from the accounts of the Greeks of Helvadere, in 19th century Greeks of Helvadere. All in all, the ruins spread over an area of around 700 hectare, but become denser on the slopes facing the center. So it's not homogeneous. I can say that the real dense urban tissue covers an area of about 50 hectare, over 170 hectares. So it's a huge city. And interesting, let me show you this video. With its position within a natural bowl, as I just mentioned, Mokissos was almost invisible in the highlands from a distance, except the Acropolis and its fortress to the northwest, and the lack of intervisibility from sites nearby is really remarkable. I mean, it's really a hidden town in 6th century. The town has a dense urban environment comprising about, according to Berger, 1,000 houses. We haven't counted them all yet, hoping to doing so starting from next summer. Roughly built with local stone and covered with a flat roof or partially vaulted, to which we will return shortly because this is the main topic of our talk today. More than 30 monumental pagan tombs, Roman tombs, which belong to an earlier Roman necropolis, that have subsisted amid the vestige of the 6th century settlement. So most of these neat constructions are integrated within the 6th century urban tissue. A fortified acropolis to the northwest hill, containing likely a military garrison buildings, a heavily damaged ecclesiastical complex in the center of the site. This is important because Mokissos was a bishopric, an archbishopric. So the archbishop was residing in the town. So it must have a bishop palace, as we know from Anatolian archaeologists, I mean from other Justinian town, or let's say late antique towns in Turkey, and several other smaller churches seem attached to this central complex. Two other relatively well-preserved churches on the western slopes of the valley, locally known as Kemerli Kilise and Kara Kilise, and more than 25 other smaller churches all around the town. All these buildings, presumably built in the 6th century, covering the whole 6th century, and perhaps at the very beginning of the 7th century. From that period onwards, the building activity in the town ceased, and it seems Mokissos had no social, political, or religious importance in later centuries. Only occasional repairs, possibly during 10th and 11th centuries, are visible in a small number of churches, like in Kara Kilise. And two Middle Byzantine monasteries outside the site appear to have been built with spolia, or reused materials that are coming from Mokissos. So this is also a plan we made last summer, and it shows in the orange sections the most distinctive aspect of the town, that is its secular residential architecture. So these are the residential areas. It was very densely populated town for a 6th century city in the middle of, I would say, nowhere in Anatolia. And these are obvious reminders of the dynamic social and economic life in the settlement, as well as in the broader late antique and early medieval periods in Cappadocia. That is, when I say late antique, early medieval in Cappadocia, from 4th to beginning of 7th centuries. Now I leave the floor to my colleague Selin, who was in charge of documenting all this architectural data evidence. So she will give us a detailed overview of the secular residential architecture. Let me exit my...
Thank you, Hocam.
Just a second. Okay.
Is my screen clearly seen now?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, thanks for the invitation. Hope you enjoy our talk on civil architecture of Mokissos. I will briefly talk about our fieldwork in 2020 in Mokissos. We carried out mapping and architectural documentation during last season. Since it was the first year of scientific survey, an infrastructure for the excavation would be needed. We designed control points, produced and implemented them in 10 strategic points, had high precision static survey and leveling to get below centimeter precision coordinates. To generate a base map, we both use aerial and terrestrial surveying methods, implemented temporary control points by using ErgoField real-time documentation system that we designed and developed, attached to GNSS, Global Navigation Satellite System, got their coordinate data, planned a flight route and got aerial images, post-processed images with coordinate data, Thus, we get 3D point cloud, generated 3D surface model of the site, and base map with 1 meter contour lines. I would like to introduce you and thank Field Tech team who contributed in surveying and digitizing process of the project. The team is consisted of architects, urban planners, surveyors, and art historians. We are drawing stone plans, schematic plans, and other architectural documentation of Mokissos ancient settlement. After this short brief, I will continue with civil architecture in Mokissos. According to initial analysis, we think there are 3 different typologies are existed in Mokissos civil architecture. They are traditional houses, monumental buildings, and local vernacular architecture. I utilized from my own experience and early research for categorizing them. I will also try to enlighten the terms in related sections. In this presentation, I will give information about location, building form, structural system, roof system, openings, and courtyards of each type. I would like to start with most common type, which is scattered in whole settlement, traditional houses. These buildings have tetragonal or polygonal plans. They mostly have single cell. Sometimes we encounter with a division wall in interior. The building units both can be self-standing or attached. Even there is no remain of roof, we believe that they were covered with a terrace roof. Building height of this type is up to 4 or 5 meters, which is unusual for modern world. Building technique is polygonal dry masonry wall. They have entrances with reasonable dimensions. They are big, like 2 people can easily enter. Some of them have windows. Buildings are not oriented according to settlements characteristics, not climate. Their entrances and windows are in different directions. It says us that the entrances are not always at south, or windows are not always looking to the where sun comes. They might have more than 1 wall as a retaining wall in slopes of the hills. These retaining walls continue and exist artificial terraces with the same building system. The retaining walls do not only exist an artificial terrace, but also exist building blocks and roads. Cases from the traditional type will be shown in this presentation are located in 3D model of the site. As you can see, they are scattered in whole site, bottom of the valley, hillsides, hilltops, everywhere. Thus, geographical characteristic was not a boundary to build this type of building. To make you imagine a construction of the remains, I positioned some ghost boxes on the exact locations of the traditional houses. Let's look at them slightly distant and repeat their characteristics. They are scattered, self-standing or attached, tetragonal or polygonal plans, single or double cells in a unit. Neighbor building blocks may define a road in between. The roads attached to each other net the settlement and reach out almost all single buildings. As you know, there are not only civil architecture in Mokissos, there are also religious buildings, big churches, as Tolga Hoca mentioned. These roads also attach other buildings with this kind of buildings. There is another building unit with 2 tiny windows in west facade. The buildings have doors in reasonable dimensions, as I mentioned before. Here we put Serhat, who is 180 centimeter tall, to give a scale. Architecture of some buildings does not provide full vision of the space, as in the case from the entrance. In this building entrance, this building's entrance is in the corner. In these cases, you can see there's a circular plan element attached to or close to building's interior walls. It may be a fireplace or a workshop. Since there wasn't any excavation, we do not know for what purpose these components added to the buildings. Hope this year or next years we are going to understand why these circular elements were attached to these buildings. The wall technique seems simple, but it is actually very clever. In polygonal technique, each stone is surrounded by other stone blocks like daisy leaves. That means if you miss any stone in the middle of the wall, it won't be destroyed. You can see in the picture on right bottom, there's a missing stone, but the wall is still stands. It also explains us how these buildings could stand for thousands of years. There is no clue for now, but stairs might be used in buildings to link lower level to upper levels. In this picture, we see a white ramp-like element attached to interior retaining wall of a unit. Even today, we use it to reach inside of the space from upper level. There's a hybrid structure. Different stages can easily be seen from its plan and facade. There's a vault structure in the middle, which was built in Roman period as a grave. It is surrounded by a few buildings and linked to attached units afterwards. The unit at left side has 2 doors, as you can see in the plan. This tells us that there would be a division wall in this unit in previous time. While it repaired and reused, one of the doors is cancelled at the photo down right. And the division wall is removed. Spaces are reunited and widened. Additionally, separated units are connected to this complex with modern walls constructed by village people. This valley is used by village people in closer times. Another type is monumental buildings situated in valley plains. Even they also have tetragonal or polygonal plans. Respect to their uniform and symmetrical plans and wall technique, we think these buildings reflect different characteristics from traditional ones. Additionally, these types are self-standing buildings, not attached to each other, has double row thick walls. By the way, all these monumental buildings are close to the center where the main church is located. This argument is also make us think that these buildings might be used by public, administrative, or ecclesiastical authorities. The regular masonry walls are constructed with worked stones in almost equal sizes. Roof of these monumental buildings is unknown. However, according to their character, they may have a pitched roof instead of terrace roof. The third and last building type is unlikely organic. Actually, these organic forms remind us local vernacular architecture as a reflection of established culture rather than a civilization. The building units have circular, elliptical, or softened edge polygonal plan cells linked to each other with doors or arcs. A cistern may be attached to a building complex. Both cistern and living units are enclosed with dome or vault. Living units have dry masonry walls, while cisterns are mortared. Most of the buildings have courtyards. The houses are situated in valley plains or foothills, not in whole of the settlement. There is one of the cases and its section. The section is not scaled, it was just field sketch. As you see in the section, there are arches or walls which connects to the spaces to each other, and they are mostly multi-cell buildings. The picture shows remains of two attached dome units. There's an arc in between. In this slide, pink reflects early construction, while orange is modern. The bottom of the valley is used by modern people as stockyards and barns. Thus, existing buildings are repaired and reused. However, modern walls sometimes constructed on substructure of early walls. There's another example. There's another example with courtyard and 3 regular cells. There is one more. A picture of the courtyard is also seen. There is one more case. Here you can see the section. There's a cistern attached to building. Number 3 is a cistern, which is in a lower level than living units. Living units are attached to each other with doors or arcs. There's a courtyard on west. Another one. This diagram is generated from my master thesis called Analysis of Tribal Huts According to Local Natural Properties. The diagram shows direct and indirect relation of climate, land, and local material with building form and structural system. Apart from local natural properties, living style is also directly affected on building form. According to diagram, geographical location is not affected on architecture. Even there is no cultural relationship, if related properties are similar, communities would build in the same way all over the world. This example from South Africa is quite similar to our last archetype. Dry masonry dome structures attached to each other as a courtyard. There are more examples from Europe and Asia too. This is from France as well. Thank you very much for the invitation. My presentation is finished, and I would like to thank Tolga Hoca as well to give me this chance.
Thank you so much, Selin Hanım. Maybe if you can stop sharing.
Didn't I?
We are going back to Tolga Hoca?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, nice. Sorry Tolga Hocam, buyurun lütfen. Mikrofonunuzu sesi.
Hocam mikrofonunuz kapalı. Tolga Hoca.
Mute'sunuz hala ama. Oldu.
Değil mi?
Oldu. Hı hı.
Tamam. Okay. Of course, the settlement at Viranşehir is not unique in its residential architecture. Lycia, Cilicia, Lycaonia, Syria, and other regions preserves examples too. However, the closest comparison with Mokissos in terms of construction technique may be the settlements in Dağören and Gölören in Binbir Kilise in Karadağ. that can be dated to the same period and which share the characteristics of the 7th century refuge settlements, which I return shortly. So when Justinian fortified the frontiers of the empire in the 6th century, the frontier lay much farther to east, like here up to Syria, so well beyond Cappadocia. But with the Persian wars on the early 7th century and subsequent expansion by the Arab Caliphate, Cappadocia became threatened. The first Arab incursions came in 641, as you know, the middle of the 7th century. So by circa 660, the frontier was established in Cilicia along the Taurus. As Albrecht Berger already pointed out, the creation of the settlements in Binbir Kilise, much as in Mokissos in Viranşehir, may be the consequence of the immigration phenomena created by the Islamic conquests. Small or middle-sized agrarian villages or towns must have been evacuated permanently, creating thus a need for larger and denser protected built environments. Unsurprisingly, these so-called immigrant towns must have been constructed relatively quickly. Still, this could only partially explain rough and imprecise construction in technique in Viranşehir. The main construction material is this local basalt stone, which was used without further effort to be quarried. So you don't really need it because these are natural blocks lying around. As we compare it to that of Binbir Kilise or other examples in Asia Minor or in broader Eastern Mediterranean, so here's to a case which was directly modeled in my mind by the physical environment and the geology of the construction site. And the only true visual parallel I was able to find is some crude church construction in southern Greece, in Mani. But these are later constructions. I mean, slightly later constructions because the historical context is completely different. Well, to conclude, other newly built cities in 6th century by Justinian, such as Justiniana Prima in the Balkans, could be considered part of the classical Hellenistic and Roman urban tradition, since they were planned by architects and engineers from Constantinople, according to a basic conceptual model, which was locally adapted to the specific needs of each settlement. Mokissos stands in dramatic contrast to Justinian's contemporaneous foundations in the Balkans and in Anatolia, as there is no evidence for a pre-existent grid street layout. The urban planning of Mokissos is not comparable to that of these towns. It's entirely organic. The peculiar landscape and desire for defensibility seem to determine the urban structure of the town, encircled with natural fortifications, in other words, the hills, the surrounding hills. For the ecclesiastical architecture, Viranşehir seems to present characteristics of local Anatolian building traditions and regional stone masonry, horseshoe arches, and polygonal apses. This pushes me to think in terms of secular architecture, why not the peculiar archaic forms and techniques of constructions may wouldn't be also suggest it was locally planned by regional builders instead of real architects and engineers. It also stands as a good example of the dramatic changes in Roman urbanism through 4th and 5th centuries. Later Byzantine towns will follow this pattern, like this organic evolution or development. Nevertheless, the population density and the extensiveness of residential zones in Viranşehir seems to be unrivaled elsewhere in the Byzantine world. Around 1,000 insulae. I mean, these are comparable to Roman buildings and need further explanation through extensive archaeological investigations. Why our archaeological project on site. Thank you for listening. Should I unshare my screen or I just leave it?
Yes, if you could maybe stop sharing, we can.
Okay.
If needed, we can refer back to the images.
Yeah.
But for the questions, I usually
Okay.
it, and we will see everyone's face as far as we can. So thank you so much. I think this is a fascinating presentation, early presentation of the site. It's a very interesting site. Thank you for the work and sharing with us. Okay, I think I will first leave the floor to the audience and the questions. I think there must have some. So if you know, as usual, I cannot really see everyone, but you can either jump in and ask, or I can maybe allow you to.
Pelin Hoca.
Sun hocam lütfen.
Thank you so much. Well, I must thank, usually we thank the speakers, but in this case, I would like to thank Pelin Hoca, because this is absolutely spectacular. I mean, the Pelin Hoca fished you out and brought you to the architectural history talks. Normally, in our talks in architectural history, we hear different interpretations, but it is very seldom that we are the ground for sharing absolutely new information. And that's what I see here. It's absolutely spectacular. I mean, when we talk about early Byzantine, we think of the metropolitan areas, we think of, palaces, or we think of Cappadocia. And what you have here is a brand new city. I mean, you mentioned that geologically, I mean, in the 6th century, it was hidden, and maybe that's a selection reason for the location. But it seems that it was also hidden from the scholarly community. I mean, you mentioned, yes, Procopius seems to mention. You mentioned 1930s. I mean, there was some mention, and then it wasn't until the 1980s when Albrecht, Berger, made an exposition of the site. And I think right now, you have a splendid, opportunity in front of you for recording, for new interpretations, for implementing new methodologies, bringing together archaeology, architectural history, and other multidisciplinary fields. I think this is absolutely fantastic. I'm thrilled about your work. One thing I would like to ask is, I mean, these early sites in archaeology are notoriously difficult to date, especially when you're talking about 5th or 6th centuries. Do you have, I mean, you mentioned historical incidents, yes, but do you have any firm basis for dating? I mean, what kind of dating criteria do you use? That's my question. But thank you very much.
I thank you, Suna Hocam, for this wonderful comment, for your wonderful comments. Well, I guess the church architecture is a solid basis for our dating criteria. The so-called Kemerli Kilise, it's a typical 6th century building, which corroborates the historical account of Procopius. But as you rightfully underlined, well, in the case of the secular architecture, the chronology is a bit problematic, but we hope coming up with some further archaeological evidence to create a sort of internal chronology within the site, hopefully. But I guess besides the church architecture, there isn't any other evidence.
Okay, thank you. Good luck. Also, you mentioned that for the natural blocks from the site, I mean, not cut stone masonry, but natural, blocks. You mentioned some the comparisons in, Greece. Well, Ireland is also a good example. I mean, the early ascetic architecture in Ireland. I mean,
okay.
There are some very interesting stone, structures dated to the 7th century there. I don't know how they date them to the 7th century, but I mean, the Galarus oratory, for example, is one example. You might find it interesting to use that as a comparison as well. But thank you so much. This is spectacular.
Thank you, thank you for your reference. It's very interesting. I'll take note on it. Thank you.
Thank you Sun hocam. Ben kendi adıma da benim için de çok hoş oldu. Teşekkür ederim hocam. Ben de çok keyifle davet ettim Tolga. Any other questions? Ömür hocamı görüyorum.
Ömür Hoca da unuttu mikrofonu.
Sesinizi unmute. Olmadı.
Yanlış yerden yap.
Oldu.
I also want to thank you, both of you, for this excellent talk. It was very interesting. I had no idea about the vernacular architecture in this area. Now my interest is with materials. Did you say the stone was collected from the area? No quarries, no stone quarries? You couldn't find it. It's basalt and collected from the area.
Well, except the ashlar constructions of the three main churches.
Yes.
And some other smaller church buildings, we do not have precisely cut stone blocks.
No,
in constructions. Yes. All the rest is the so-called volcanic bombs, these explosions.
I see.
Well, there's no real quarries within, or perhaps outside the town. We might be able to find something, yes. But there's up to now we haven't came across any quarries, visible quarries.
The stones and the construction somehow reminds me of Hattusha also, and there also they mentioned that the basalt blocks were collected from the site. So there, it's of course much earlier. Hattusha is much earlier, but there might be some topographical connection.
Thank you for this. Thank you for this information, Ömür Hocam. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It was very, very good, very stimulating. Thank you. Pelin Hoca, teşekkürler. Çok iyiydi.
Teşekkür ederiz hocam. Other questions? Bir chat görüyorum. Güner Sağır. So, Güner Hanım, are you there? You want to read your comments yourself, or?
This was all I wanted to ask. I'm here, but this was all. Thank you very much.
Sağ olun hocam. Bir comment var, onu okuyacağım ama belki sesli ben okuyayım o zaman. So Güner Sağır says that, thanks for the presentations. Mokissos is a very important area for the early Byzantine period, and also field conditions are most difficult for research. I think these research results will provide us with very important data for the early Byzantine period. And in addition, there will be a chance to review the results of old researches with new technologies. So, congratulations, and everyone is very thankful. And Deniz Sever also mentions that the site appears to be very large from the video. And she asks which sections of the city are you going to give the priority for the excavations and the surveys for this year, I guess, right?
Yes, we will start with the very heart of the city, the so-called ecclesiastical complex in the center. Well, if indeed this is the cathedral of, and if the surrounding buildings are the bishopric palace, that will give us plenty of evidence, hopefully. And so this is why we are planning to start from there.
Okay. Okay. And any other questions? Okay. Now I have a question. If you, so thank you from my point of view as well. My question is about the spatial organizations of the whole city. So I think Selin Hanım showed us a certain street-like alliance. Is that the only one about the network, or any? I mean, the entrance. I mean, the alignment of the topography is very much shaping the whole morphology. It looks like it. It's very much obvious. There is probably a central avenue, if there is. But
Actually,
you only have one.
Mhm.
Okay, Selin Hanım söyleyecek.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure, lütfen. My question is about.
Okay. We actually had a urban analysis in Mokissos to figure out how people settled there, how was the relationship between geography and buildings, and with buildings to each other as well. We realized a lot of things by this urban analysis. So interdisciplinary workings is really important in that kind of settlements, I think. We saw that almost all of the settlements are artificially terraced by walls, and these terrace walls are retaining walls, of course, has the same building technique with traditional buildings. It says us that they were simultaneous buildings, so traditional buildings were built in the same time with the terraces, and Roman tombs are under these terraces, so they are now uncovered, or their remains can be found because of the illegal excavations. And these terraces sometimes define roads, and also building facades also define roads because they are attached to each other. And we see that entrances of these buildings are along the road. So that also makes me think maybe some of the buildings were not used for civil purposes, maybe trade, atelier, workshops, and that kind of purpose are also possible instead of civil structures. But architecturally, there's no difference between others. So you are right. There's a net in whole of the settlement with roads. These roads relates whole buildings to each other, especially the main religious buildings. Even they are behind a hill, a single road goes until that building.
So you mentioned, I guess, there are two monasteries in the hinterland of the city, right?
Yes, these are two monasteries which are not included in our documentation yet. But some of the churches could also be monastic buildings as well. I mean, I'm talking about the city itself, within the city. But this is why in excavation is also very important. Well, city monasteries is a well-known phenomenon, as you know.
Oh. Very interesting. It's a very, very nice puzzle, no? Fatma hocamı görüyorum.
Merhaba, iyi akşamlar. Hello. Thank you very much to Selin Küçük and Tolga Uyar for this excellent presentation. Sesim geliyor galiba, değil mi?
Geliyor.
I have a question about these circular structures that you have discovered. You mentioned organic circular structures, and you compared this with some other examples, not from the regional area, I think, but I think these were kind of kilns, fireplaces. Do you have any preliminary suggestion for these circular installations? Are these part of workshops that you have just mentioned, or do you have any analogies, local analogies for these circular structures? Thank you.
Thank you very much Fatma hocam. Tolga hocam, siz mi cevap verirsiniz?
Go ahead and I'll take the...
To make it clear, do you mean the circular structures inside traditional buildings, like in polygonal or tetragonal wall plan buildings, or organic form structures?
Okay. The one that you mentioned as organic.
Vernacular ones.
Yes, as vernacular, yes.
Okay. The vernacular structures. I called them local vernacular because they are very harmonically interacted with the geography and each other. There's a really good harmony in between them and with the geography. And also their form are not perfect. It's all organic. It's like compounds, tribal compounds in Africa or other continents. And their sizes are changing. They have all local material, and their working style, building style is completely different from traditional ones. They have smaller stone blocks than traditional ones. Their ceiling heights are lower, and their planning are completely organic. But traditional ones needs more workforce. So I thought these organic forms, vernacular architecture, must be built by settled people in there for more years, like thousands years maybe. But other type, traditional type, are products of a civilization. So they might be built by Byzantine, but the organic ones, vernacular ones, are built by their settlers, their local people. It's all my thought, actually. I don't know what Tolga Hoca says about it.
Okay, thank you. Of course, this interpretation goes well beyond the Byzantine context. I mean, it goes very deep further back. The two extremes. On one side, we have the city, the city's toponym, Mokissos, is not a Greek name. It's a Hellenized form of a local name, and it is probably goes back to well, Hittite or whatever. We have this phenomenon is very common in Cappadocia. So and the other extreme, we have the so-called tandır evleri tradition in the late Anatolia, or the pigeon houses in Kayseri. These are wonderful buildings which uses pretty much the same construction technique. Well, this is what I taught, and we call these vernacular structures, we like to call them Star Wars houses. You know, in Star Wars series, well, you goes in different planets where you have this kind of.
Thank you.
Thank you Gül Hocam. Any other questions? Biraz önce birini daha görmüştüm galiba ama.
Hocam Gözde Demir elini kaldırdı.
Evet.
Lütfen buyurun.
Merhaba. I would like to ask about cluster using of houses. Is there any evidence of cluster using on the and other houses
Tek
on
ben
the side?
değil mi? So we cannot really hear you, Gözde. Can you repeat?
Is there evidence of cluster using on the other walls?
I'm afraid I will ask you to write, if you don't mind, your question, because I think it's from the connection. We cannot really hear you well. So belki onu beklerken, I might ask one more question about the working. Just out of curiosity, I mean, the landscape is not really helping you, probably, right? While you were having these, you know, the ArcGIS and these the stationary points and etc. And as far as I understand, maybe I meant wrong, but you got the whole base map already, right? And now it looks like you will be concentrating on. So you was it? How hard was it? I mean, to get the whole base map? Yes. So you know, topography is.
Yeah, this is actually our job professionally. We are providing service to architectural survey and excavations for generating base map and architectural documentation. Tolga Hoca was one of our customers, actually.
Okay. So I'm guessing your funding for the excavation is good then, Tolga Hoca.
Yeah, we are.
Up to date, yes, but well, who knows tomorrow?
Okay, it's good. I mean, it's good to hear.
To answer your question, we generated base map in 1 month. Now we are drawing its stone plans and schematic plans. I showed some of them in my presentation. The area is 200 hectares big. It's too much actually, so it's not that easy. We are working a few people on this project, but all of us are expertised in architecture and archaeological sites. So we will see the results soon.
I mean, it's great because I guess, I mean, in these towns, especially with this, you know, the towns that are really sitting on the topography, or kind of an embedding on the topography, the 3D modeling, and you know, the model of the site along with the structures will be more helpful for any kind of interpretation, I think.
Yes, of course. Each materials gives us different information. We combine them and we analyze everything with all the information coming from different material.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Selin Hanım. Okay, Gözde Demir has the question. So is there any evidence of plaster using on the inner and outer walls of the houses?
No.
Okay.
No. At least up to now, no.
No painting, no inscription, no plaster.
No.
Yeah, there's only cisterns, mortar attached to houses, but not inside or outside of the houses.
Is there any clue about any water supply system or?
Well, Selin has some crazy ideas about it, but well, we'll see.
Okay.
Well, yes. Right now, we don't have any strong evidence for such a supply, but well, we'll see.
Okay. Any other questions, dear audience?
Hocam, we have Sevim Karabıyık with her hand raised.
Yes.
Sevim,
Hi, hocam. I would like to thank you and Selin for this presentation. Actually, something you said made me wonder if it's ever possible that the churches, all these complexes about the monumental buildings, including churches, they seem to predate the so-called traditional houses. Have you had a chance to make any surveys, field surveys down in the town in Helvedere?
Well, can I answer?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Well, Selin is very excited about this typology. I mean this classification, but we still have to be very careful about this sort of identification as being traditional, vernacular, and monumental. So, so we will see with the excavation. Perhaps we'll have some better ideas about the chronological relationship between these three types. But these three so-called typologies to be further investigated before as it presented to the scholarly world as a strong argument.
I have some pictures of buildings from Helvedere village. If you would like to see, I can share my scene again. We actually compare the buildings with the buildings inside the Mokissos, but there is no similarity actually about building technique, if you are asking about it.
Sure, but what I wonder really is if Mokissos, where it is now, where you are researching, was mainly a religious site, and the town itself was somewhere away, and with the Arab raids, people had to move up to the religious site. Because if I am not wrong, you said the churches mainly date from the 6th century and the beginning of the 7th, but later, I mean, that's all predating the Arab raids. I mean, if they took defense there, if they took shelter there, up was the
Yeah,
question.
that's a possibility. That's a possibility, but the topography, in my mind, I mean, the topography looks looks an important criteria for the settlement rather than the religious. I guess not the religious factors, but rather topographical.
Being further up and being safer.
Criteria.
Okay. Thank you.
I guess the number of the churches, at least the documented churches, well, it's quite acceptable for a Byzantine town. I mean, there isn't much. I mean, it's quite normal.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, hocalarım? Dear audience? No? Galiba. Okay. So then, thank you again for our presenters for presenting this fascinating work, field work, especially, and for sharing with us their original documentations, which is not really published yet, değil mi? If I'm not wrong. So
No,
it's
we haven't published anything yet. I mean, we just published some in some popular press, some just to make the voice of the project. That's all. Okay. Like Atlas or Arkeoloji Dünyası or things like that.
So I'm guessing we will be hearing more about Mokissos.
Hopefully, yes. And all the funding proposals are truly welcome. We love you.
Okay, it's good to also for dear audience, please consider Tolga''s call for elimizi korkak alıştırmayalım. And thank you again for today's talk. For Tolga Hoca and Selin Hanım, thank you for joining us for this lecture. And for the audience, we will be eylemlerimize devam edeceğiz. Her zaman söylediğim gibi. Please follow us in online social media.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Herkese sağlıklı bir akşam diliyorum. İyi kapanma günleri.